Good afternoon, everyone. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on another edition with Hanging with Harley. Harley Schlanger, somebody who needs no introduction. He is an ardent member of LaRouche PAC, and he's a great guy with an incredible perspective on geopolitical events and all the things that are happening in the world. Harley ties it together with a really awesome intellectual perspective that is severely lacking in many outlets today. So without any further ado, Harley, thank you for being back. And again, buddy, Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year to you and all the listeners. And this could be a very, very good New Year. I can tell you that it's one that's the establishment is not too happy to see.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We're seeing some interesting events. I want to start with probably the most important strategic developments, which have to do with the continuing shift in the policy in Southwest Asia, where you have Turkey and Russia cementing the alliance to work together to solve the problem in Syria. And in particular, you had this terrorist incident in Istanbul on New Year's Eve. And again, the Turks' view, the Erdogan government view, is that this is aimed at destabilizing Turkey and breaking up the alliance with the Russians. There's a very interesting editorial in a leading Turkish journal which said, look, the target of this is the Russian-Turkish alliance. Why? Because the world has changed. Syria is out of the control of the Anglo-Americans. And there's nothing that the Saudis, the Israelis, the British, or the Obama administration can do to pull it back under their umbrella. In other words, regime change wars in the Middle East may be coming to an end. And even the Saudis are beginning to read the handwriting on the wall. The Israelis also. I mean, Netanyahu is still a complete lunatic with a lot of dangerous capabilities.
Right.
But he's having to pay attention to what the Russians are doing. So as we enter the new year, you see the desperation. I don't know, I'm sure many of your listeners saw Obama's co-killer, James Brennan, did an interview with NPR a couple of days ago. And when he was pressed by the reporter, why should anyone listen to the CIA after your record? And he said, well, the Iraq weapons of mass destruction story is many years ago, light years away, he said. And he said, we now have a thoroughly revamped, higher capability of analytical tools. Then 2 minutes later, when she asked about Syria, he said, well, the Russians had a scorched earth policy. What's happening in Syria is a tragedy. What happened with ISIS, well, who could have forecasted? Well, here's the guy who just said they've revamped their tools, they've upgraded their capability, and then he says they missed the fact that terrorism was developing in Iraq right under their noses, one might actually say under their direction.
Right.
So when you hear someone like Brennan say something like that, then contrast that with Julian Assange's interview with Hannity, where Assange made the point, the Democrats are going to spend the next 4 years rehashing the same issue. It's going to hurt them. He said they think they're going to get short-term gains, but it's going to hurt them and the country because it's not strategic. Right. I think this is the point. I talked to Mr. LaRouche earlier today, and he said, whatever you do in the next weeks, get people to think about global strategy. There's no such thing as a local issue right now in the United States. You know, the question of garbage collection and dog catchers have to be viewed from the strategic perspective. Yeah, got a lot of pregnant dogs running around. It was probably Brennan who impregnated them.
Oh, so man.
We got to get people thinking on this higher strategic level because America has been weakened.
Yes.
By the fact that people stopped thinking strategically and started thinking very pragmatically, thinking practically about elections, thinking practically about jobs, about money. You can't do that anymore. There's no simple solution to this unraveling financial situation. People who write to me and say, well, what should I do with my money? Your money is worthless unless we change how the government functions. Dollars can come and go in the bat of an eye. You know, even in the United States, people think their money's safe. What happened in 2008? How many people lost half or more of their portfolio with that collapse. And now we have a bigger one on the way. So think strategically. That has to be the motto for people in this new year. And that means you have to think about how the United States can break out of the control of Wall Street and the City of London, break out of the control of the neocons and the neolibs, and start addressing real issues, such as how we're going to line up with the new system that's coming into being with Russia, China, India, and other countries. Is it to our benefit? And I just want to finish my opening rant with this following point. There's a big fight in the United States right now on economic policy, and there are a lot of not very good guys around Trump. Now, whether they have his ear or not, I don't know. But they're saying you have to do infrastructure through private partnerships. They're saying they're the deficit hawks. The same ones who have pushed austerity for years are saying we can't afford to invest in infrastructure. We can't afford not to. How could a government that spent almost $800 billion on a non-existent stimulus plan under Obama and spent trillions of dollars bailing out worthless banks say that you can't create new credit for something productive? This is where people have to change their thinking.
Exactly correct. I mean, we've spent trillions, wasted trillions on these useless banks. We could definitely, use that money to create infrastructure jobs that would actually start creating some real money velocity versus the capital destruction that has occurred by this unwanted stimulus, man. It's unreal.
Then you look at what's happening in Europe, and Mario Draghi changed the goalposts again. He told the Italian banks they have to be capitalized at the level of the Greek banks. Now, the Greek banks are all zombie banks right now. They can't make loans. They basically have virtually frozen people's accounts. People aren't putting their money in their banks anymore. But what Draghi said is that the Italian banks have to have a tier 1 capital ratio that's somewhere in the range of almost 12%. Now, a report came out yesterday that said there's not even a single German bank that could have that level of capital reserves. This is an impossible task, on top of which, after the EU gave Italy permission, the European Union, the European Central Bank gave Italy permission to do a 20 billion euro bailout, because if they didn't, they would have had to do a bail-in. And 40,000 depositors and savers at the Monte dei Paschi Bank would have lost between a third and 2/3 of their deposits. So the Italian government got the EU to allow them to do a 20 billion euro bailout. And then the EU came out and said, well, you don't need 5.5 billion, you actually need closer to 9 billion.
Yeah.
And where are they going to get the extra 3.5 billion? From a bail-in. So they constantly are changing the rules. And I think what we're going to see is at some point in the next couple of months, Italy heading out the door. There are reports that they're looking into what it would take to go back onto the lira. There are also discussions going on between Italy and the Chinese on would the Chinese back them up. And the Chinese and the Russians don't want to take the blame for Europe falling apart. They're fairly clever on this. They want the Italians to just stick it to Brussels and stick it to the City of London. So we'll see some real changes in the months ahead. And it's up to your listeners to make a decision to have the United States be part of those changes.
Right, exactly. Now, Harley, let me ask you this. I mean, you mentioned how Mario Draghi keeps changing the goalposts. What is your opinion? Is this just gross stupidity, or is there something nefarious behind what Draghi's doing? Is he that dumb, or is he really, really willingly driving the entire Eurozone into the ground?
Look at his past. Draghi was known for the famous Britannia incident in the late 1990s, when the yacht of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth was docked off the coast of Italy.
Yeah.
And they brought the Italian government on and read them the Riot Act about what they're going to have to do to qualify to be in the euro. Draghi has been on the ground floor on this. He's the one who changed the rules so that Monte dei Paschi could take over a failing bank to save the deposits of Deutsche Bank, BNP Paribas, Santander, and others.
Right.
Draghi is the one who caused the crisis with Monte dei Paschi. Now, this is a guy who is partly covering his tracks, but partly he's all in. He's a key figure in this effort to reconfigure European banking, to make the banks the controllers of every nation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the real issue in Europe. Will there be, when you talk about economic sovereignty or sovereignty in general, it's not just a question of who's making the rules, it's a question of, is there any allowable way for these governments to defend their people? And under the EU bureaucracy, there's none. Draghi is a hardcore figure along with Van Rompuy and the people Nigel Farage likes to mock as the non-elected bureaucrats.
Right.
Well, no one elected most of these guys. Many of them come from London bankers, London banking institutions. So, and Draghi himself, what's his background? Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs. I mean, his son. I mean, remember the whole Swiss franc incident last year, where the Swiss depegged from the euro, and his son Giacomo was on the other end of that trade. He had the insider info that this was going to happen, and while everybody else was getting a haircut, taking a bath of what occurred, Giacomo, this no-talent hack of a son of Mario Draghi, did very well. Strangely, I'm sure it's just coincidence. I'm sure Giacomo is such an outstanding trader, and that's why.
Well, these things happen, as you know, with more regularity than that could be just attributed to a simple conspiracy theory. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's actually, you have these bankers acting as though they're the governments.
Yeah. And
this is why you see so much anger in the population. And it's coming back to haunt Merkel. Now, on the other side, Putin, the latest poll, and this was done by a Western polling agency out of, actually it was somewhere in Eastern Europe, but it's not a friendly to Putin polling agency, 87% support for Putin going into the new year.
Wow.
And,
wow.
You know, look at Hillary Clinton and you know, you look at these guys running around like Brennan saying the Russians did it, the Russians did it. Give us another month and we'll come up with the evidence.
Yeah, we gotta go concocting evidence, and hopefully their evidence is better than the fake birth certificate that Obama put out.
Well, if these guys had evidence, it would have already come out. And Obama's point that, well, we don't want to compromise our sources. If the Russians are so smart, they already know who the sources are.
Exactly.
And it's all a fraud.
Of course it is. Just like the idiotic story put out by the Washington Post about that Vermont power grid being hacked by the Russians, and it turned out to be malware on a laptop that's not even connected to the internet.
Well, and more importantly, that had nothing to do with the electricity grid.
Yeah.
It took the Washington Post almost 4 days to actually fully, I don't think they've even fully retracted it yet. But you want to talk about fake news? Washington Post and New York Times lead the pack.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And you see the issues that are coming out with this whole fake news nonsense, and I believe this is going to fire back on them big time.
It has to, because look, the other reality is that these networks are losing their viewers. This is people think, well, gee, NBC pulled a coup by bringing Megyn Kelly over. It's not a coup. It's a desperate effort to save some ratings. You know, they've learned from Rupert Murdoch. If you put women with long legs and short skirts in front of a glass table, some people will watch.
Exactly, man. Exactly. It's unbelievable.
Content doesn't matter, and you know, people do get somewhat influenced by these things, but more it's just the constant droning in the background, which convinces them that no matter what happens, you won't get a positive outcome. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, the deadening effect of the mass media in this country. And you know, when people listen to your program and you challenge them, I challenge them, oftentimes you see a defensive reaction. Well, yes, I already know that the bad guys are bad, but you can't beat them. And that's just submitting to the power of those who control the narrative.
Yeah.
The narrative is filled with lies. There's almost nothing true about what's coming out of the mainstream media, what's coming out of the mouths of political officials, and people know it, but they think you have to pay attention to it and you have to be overheard repeating it. And one of the things that impressed me most when I first met Lyndon LaRouche is he said, don't say things just so you'll be overheard saying something that's acceptable.
Yeah.
If you have to, he said, you have to tell the truth. Don't give in to popular opinion or pragmatism. And I think that's the lesson we got in 2016. Whatever else Trump is, he didn't pay attention to the popular narrative. He had his own intent, his own story, and he went with it and left a shambles of the political system in the United States, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly correct, man. Exactly correct. And right now he's draining the swamp, and the CIA is worried. The elites are worried. The real change happening here, Harley. Real change happening for sure.
The report today was really interesting. That Trump said we're going to have fewer people in bureaucratic positions in the CIA and more people on the ground in countries where we need to know what's going on.
And that is very key and very, very important. Absolutely.
And it means that people like Brennan are out, and people who are with them are probably going to be losing their job. And this is why Brennan is desperately trying to pin this, you won the election, Trump, because of Putin.
Yeah.
Trying to get that story accepted. And it's not working. The population is beginning to smell the fraud there.
Right, exactly correct. And it's amazing to see that the guy leading the charge on this is General Michael Flynn himself on taking on the CIA, somebody who Brennan shunned before, so it's sweet to see that irony there.
It's also quite sweet to see the irony of liberals defending the CIA and attacking Russia.
Yeah.
If you go back 40 years to the Cold War, it was the liberals who were considered soft on the Soviet Union.
Yep.
And now and also hard on the CIA. Now you see them defending the CIA for totally opportunistic reasons because they don't want to believe that Hillary lost.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely correct. Harley, we're about the end of the broadcast. How can people follow you? How can they keep tabs on you and follow the work that you do? Go ahead, sir, and give your plug your contact info.
Well, LaRouchePAC.com is the place to go. We have daily updates. We have several panel discussions each week. There was also LaRouchePub.com with the Executive Intelligence Review, and occasionally you can see an article from me in there. But I think the important thing is people can follow us every week in this Hanging with Harley, and if they want to follow it up, I've done this before. I'll give you my email address. It's harleysch@gmail.com. harleysch@gmail.com. I do respond. I do communicate with people, and I'm more than happy to be in discussion with your listeners because you have some of the more astute people on the planet.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Harley. Once again, folks, you're listening to Hanging with Harley. Harley, thank you so much for joining us again and giving us that weekly update that we find so valuable, so refreshing. You bring such a great perspective with great heavy veritas and balance. Thank you so much, Harley.
All right. Talk to you next week, V.
You got it, buddy. Take care.